Magazine had this special edition on global warming in the sense that you had to be worried. You had to be very worried. Now, a few of you may be old enough to remember that 30 years before that, they had a special issue on global cooling.
Yep. We're all old enough.
So much for the mainstream media's ability to predict climate. Now, my name is ARVID Pasto, and causing the Earth temperature to rise uncontrollably. Well, are human greenhouse gas emissions affecting the climate? No. Our climate changes naturally, as I said. It's mostly controlled by the sun, which is modified by the influence of the oceans and the clouds. And there's no way that you can monkey with the atmosphere globally. So there's really no way to know what parameters are affecting what. You have to have climate models, GCMs. These require billion-dollar computers, and the runtime can be hundreds of thousands of dollars per second. So only governments can afford these. And guess what? These global climate models don't work very well. They can't predict the future, I'll show you that in a second. And they can't even hindsight. It's the old G.I. Joe problem. Garbage in, garbage out. Here's an Australian cartoon, two Australian climate scientists standing there. One says, "I don't get it. We feed it cherry-picked biased data and it still fails to predict the weather." So here's the billion-dollar supercomputers spewing out things like snow, a thing of the past. Ice caps gone in 5 years. No more rain in Australia. Cities flooded by rising sea levels. Global warming. Well, I maintain that these computers are no better than the dinosaurs were. Well, I said the global climate models fail badly. Here's probably the most expensive slide you will ever see in your life, and I won't go over it too much in detail. What it is, on the x-axis is a time clock starting in 1979, running up to 2025. On the y-axis is temperature, and they've set temperature at 0 in 1979. They chose 1979 because that's when NASA launched the satellites. There's 3 sets of satellites.
What happened to 3,000 years before that?
Well, the reason they do this is because it makes for an easy plot to understand. So that's the difference. That temperature is the difference between a 10-year time period that they took between 1970 and 1980. Said, okay, let's say this is baseline temperature, then we can go forward or backward, and it's either higher or lower than that. Anyway, this is done by a fellow named Dr. John Christie, who is head of a climate research group at the University of Alabama, Huntsville. He is the state of Alabama's state climatologist. He's the one entrusted by NASA to download all of the information from the satellites every time they fly over. So he has all of the satellite data. And those little square boxes you see on the bottom are the satellite data. That's an average of 3 different sets of satellites. He also has access to NOAA, which is the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, weather balloon data. And those are the little circles. So you can see what the temperature is doing. Now you can also see up here, he has caused, the reason this is such an expensive slide, he has caused to have run 102 climate models on these supercomputers. And they ran in 32 different groups. So he's drawn 32 lines on there. That is the computer output. And then he has taken the total average. That red line is the computer output, okay? The red line is what the computers say. This is what data says. This is reality. Next time you read something in the paper that says, oh, the computers predict, oh, the computers say this, just say, yeah.
What does data say?
Yeah, what does the data say? Always as a scientist, show me the data. Well, why would people perpetrate such a hoax? You've got to think control, socialism.
Agenda 21.
Yeah, it's all part of Agenda 21, but it's even bigger than that. First, you need to know that the organization behind the SCARE, which is the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was not asked, why is the Earth warming? They were told the Earth is warming because of CO2, you need to go prove it. Then next, of course, as with anything dealing with politics, you need to follow the money. First off, poor countries can rob the rich. There's a lot of people in the UN that not only are jealous of us, but hate us and can't wait to get their hands in our wallets. And then, of course, there's tax money to be made by governments, country governments, state governments, through something called cap and trade, which we don't have time to talk about. But there's also research dollars for scientists, for faculty, for environmental, non-governmental organizations. There's potential profit for companies. I found a letter from GPAC, GE's Political Action Committee, telling their people, vote for this because it'll be good for our company. And of course, there's profits for charlatans like the fake news authors and the Gores and the Nyes. Then you need to understand radical environmentalism. There are some people that believe that you are pollution. You are pollution, ruining the earth. And there's even some religious factions are involved in it. Remember Laudato Si a couple of years ago. And follow the money. I said already the governments can make a lot of money, and they can, no, it's going to be transparent. We're going to take the money from these companies that are putting CO2 out, we're going to give it back to you all. Yeah. It's indiscriminate use of the money. The international tax income is really what the UN is after. Redistribute our wealth. The US government, wealthy individuals, and these non-governmental organizations are spending a fortune. Companies could make a lot of money off it. Enron was all for cap and trade. They lobbied for it. Hedge funds like Lehman Brothers were into it. Goldman Sachs lobbied for the passing of the cap and trade laws. They actually formed a company called the Chicago Climate Exchange with Al Gore as a partner. GE, among others, like I said, I found a letter from GPAC. Of course, the news media makes big bucks off scary headlines. And there's other sources of money. At the bottom of this it says, Congressional House Report, March 2018. You can go find that. But they have got distinct proof that Putin and others have been funneling money into these green outfits like Sierra Fund, World Wildlife Fund. And then radical environmentalism. Here's a couple of quotes. One is from a Stanford University scientist, the top one. He says, we have to offer up scary scenarios, make simplified dramatic statements, and make little mention of any doubts we may have. Each of us has to decide what the right balance is between being effective and being honest.
The balance between being honest.
Liar, liar, dance on fire, yeah. The worst one is this bottom one. This comes from Jim Hansen, who was the director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies. These are the people that launched the temperature measuring satellites and are in charge of them. He says the democratic process isn't working. We need more people chaining themselves to coal plants. He was arrested for chaining himself to a coal plant. Well, the IPCC says, you know, we're going to go from this to this
Back to that.
to this.
Those are all third world nations, right?
Now, this is my view of their output. I didn't make that cartoon either. I didn't make this cartoon either, so maybe I'm not the only one that thinks this way. But now let's get into the politics. Every year, there's a big party held. 30,000 people show up. It's called a Conference of the Parties. That's why it says COP. These are parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So
Even
these
more
are,
after UN.
yeah, more the UN, yeah. So they meet every year somewhere, and in the 2009 conference, I've pointed out a lot of this. I just want you to see some of the words they used. An authentic global government.
Ah.
A level playing field for big businesses throughout the world.
Oh.
My favorite one is from Canada's Environment Minister, Christine Stewart, who said, no matter if the science is all phony, it will bring justice and equality in the world. If we had signed on to the treaty that was developed there, we would be agreeing to become subservient to a government, and I've got that in quotations because they actually did use the word government, consisting of over 100 other nations who had the ability to tax our GDP up to 2% a year. At the Cancun COP, Otmar Edenhofer, who was a big shot in the IPCC, was caught off camera saying, climate policy has almost nothing to do anymore with environmental protection.
Oh my God.
The climate summit in Cancun is actually an economy summit, during which the distribution of the world's resources will be negotiated.
not even trying to hide it.
Not,
No.
well, he didn't think he was
Oh, it was
in
on,
court,
it
of
was,
course.
yeah, hot mic.
And then at the Paris conference of the parties, Christiana Fierres, who was the climate chief, said, "This is the first time in the history of mankind that we are setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model that has been reigning for at least 150 years since the Industrial Revolution." Then, 3 years later, this last December, she says, "We require deep transformations of our economies and societies." Well, you may remember back in 2011 when Obama turned the EPA loose to regulate CO2, they were willing to bankrupt America for nothing. They quote their figures, "The new regulations will only cost us $78 billion a year till the end of the century. But the good part of it is it will reduce global temperatures by nothing to nothing." And I said, if you do the math, you say, what? We're going to spend $7 trillion over the century to do nothing? The UN is trying to keep temperatures below 2 degrees change, and we're talking about 0.006. Well, in 2016 at Senate hearings, Gina McCarthy was asked about that. She said, "The rule is about driving investment in renewables and advancing our ongoing clean energy revolution." She said, "That's what inventing a global economy looks like." So I say she has to be some kind of a special kind of stupid, or a raging socialist, or probably both. Well, an analysis in 2017 showed how much this Paris Accord, trying to keep the temperature below 2 degrees, would actually cost. And the guy finds out that if the U.S. delivers for the whole century on President Obama's very ambitious rhetoric, it would postpone global warming by no more than 8 months at the end of the century. The cost of the climate pact is estimated to be at least $1 to $2 trillion a year. You may remember in 2010 that China agreed, well, in 2014 they agreed to a treaty with Mr. Obama, but in 2010 they said, we're not going to sign up to legally binding emissions, because at that time they were building 2 brand new coal-fired power plants every 3 weeks. You may recall that in 2014, Obama made a grand agreement with China to limit CO2 emissions. We agreed to cut ours by 26+% from 2005 levels, and China agreed to grow theirs by an unspecified amount until they started to peak around 2030 at some unspecified amount, and then start to slow down again at some unspecified amount. What kind of tough negotiator with that? Well, here's data. Again, this is a chart. On the bottom you see 1980 to 2050, and it's emissions going up the y-axis. And I hope you can see that U.S. peaked its emissions in 2006, and we've been going down since. The European Union, which is right underneath that, they also peaked and went down. But you can see in the bottom, let's see, that's India, Japan, and Russia are now increasing. But look at China. That's the dark red one. They are absolutely driving the CO2 emissions. They're going to go off the chart. And their coal power is still growing. Now, this is an old slide, but you can see how much increase they got in coal-fired power plants up to 2013 and where it's going to go from there. And in 2017, Asia Pacific emitted more CO2 than the US and the European Union combined. You can see China, that's called Asia Pacific because it's actually Vietnam and China and others. If the US wants to do something to further lower its emissions, it's going to be meaningless in the light of what China's got in plan. Well, at the end of 2018, greenhouse gas emissions continued to grow. Here again is a plot from 59 to 2018, total billions of tons of CO2 emitted. And you can see that the US is about 16% of the total. What I find interesting here is that for years they've been working since 2015 when we had the Paris Climate Accord to limit the amount of CO2. Everybody agreed to that. Well, it's not happening. One of the reasons is China I just found this today. China added 198 million tons of coal in 2018 alone. And you see how much they rose. India, which still has over 1 billion people without adequate power, has built 52 new coal plants since Narendra Modi took over in May of 2014. Now, the most important slide in my talk is next. This one, I want you to memorize this. An analysis in 2013 showed that U.S. CO2 emission savings would have no effect. If the U.S. as a whole stopped emitting all carbon dioxide emissions, trucks, buses, planes, power generation, manufacturing, the ultimate impact on projected global temperature rise would be a reduction or a savings of approximately 0.08 degrees by the year 2050 and about 0.17 degrees by the year 2100. Amounts that are, for all intents and purposes, negligible. That is, if the U.S. ceased to exist, it would make no difference to climate change. So what is the real truth? Man is not causing global warming. The reasons there is such a strong push to get you to believe that is because of political power, monetary rewards of all sorts, and of course radical environmentalism. These people want to control your every behavior. They're the worst kind of socialist. So if carbon dioxide was a dominant control knob over global warming, which it is not, you couldn't do anything about it. Asia Pacific rules. So chill out and let's have a drink. I hope I didn't overload your ass. Or you'll be dragging your ass home.
Do we have question and answers?
Sure.
Yeah, let me run around with this. Who had a question? Elizabeth.
I'll go.
She's got the microphone.
Huh? Okay.
She's going to bring the microphone.
Okay, so my question is about geoengineering and chemtrails and its effect of convincing certain ignorant people that this is what's causing their health problems, et cetera. And so maybe we all need to get on board with that horrible agenda of, climate problems or whatever. I mean, we know that is a fact of human tampering, and we know they're loading us with aluminum and everything. So,
What about in the Middle Ages when global
Yeah.
temperatures were much higher than even today, when they had no smokestacks and no...
Greenland.
They were growing wine in Greenland. It's in Greenland.
Yes,
You may wanna
yes,
add-
Greenland, Iceland, right.
Hang on.
You may want to add to your slide presentation what does cause global warming. And I saw this at a presentation at the planetarium down in Sacramento, and they said, here's what causes global warming. And they showed the sun and the earth and how we rotated an ellipse around the sun, and how the tilt of the earth of only 1/10 of a degree could cause climate change immensely, or the rotation of around the sun, just a few hundred feet,
Yeah.
could cause immense global warming.
Well, I didn't have time to talk any science in this talk, so I left it all out. I gave a talk to Ali back in 2013, which was mostly science-based, and I went through all of that, and I agree wholeheartedly with you. There are cycles called Milankovitch cycles that occur every 100,000 years or thereabouts, in which the Earth is warm for a period of time and then it's cold. The warm periods are only 2 to 10,000 years long. The cold periods are 70 to 80,000 years long. And we have been in a warm period for 10,000 years, so we could be on borrowed time.
Yeah.
but that didn't address my question.
Well, China's doing a great job of hurrying up with electric cars, but they still need the coal generating plants to manufacture the electricity to charge up the cars. I mean, it's insanity.
The oil to run the windmills.
Yeah.
This isn't really a question, but it's something that I heard on, of all places, NPR this morning, is that our coal, even though our coal use in this country is dropping rapidly, our coal exports are the highest they've been in many, many years. And I wonder where all that coal is going.
China.
Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan.
I have an important question as a young person. Global warming is an indisputable fact. I try to present figures like this to my friends and I get laughed at. So how do we get my generation? I mean, are there scientists out there now that are trying to publish this data for more people to see? I think it is so important that we spread this around so we don't have a zombie generation, my generation.
Well, I don't know how you can get the kids to read this, but there's a very, very important book out called The Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change. It's written by Mark Morano, who has his own news feed, who sends out like a blog output every day to everybody that's interested in climate change. He tells you everything you need to know. And that book is very well illustrated. It goes chapter by chapter by chapter, all the different things that could be causing and what the effects are. So you should look that up.
Before the next person speaks, we have a donation of a book called Inconvenient Facts, the science that Al Gore doesn't want you to know, and it's a free copy. The first hand that goes up gets it. Oh my God, what am I going to do? I'll throw it up in the air if you can catch it. No, but thank you very much for this.
You're saying that CO2, if it goes up, are we all going to die?
Bring it back when you're done with it, we'll
You
give it
know
out
that if
again.
it drops
How's
below
that?
100,
If it drops,
if it drops below 150 parts per million, those plants on Earth die.
right.
So do all the animals die.
So CO2 is good.
And it was at the last ice age, the end of the last ice age, it was down to 182 parts per million. The whole planet could have died. Now it's up to 406 parts per million. And with more plants dying, and more making more dang food.
Given already?
Yeah, and the
You just pass it to the next table.
satellites that take pictures of the Earth are showing there's actually greening going on. Sahara Desert is shrinking because of extra CO2. CO2 is good for plants, like you said. It makes plants grow faster. It also makes them more efficient at the use of water. Yes. Okay.
Need a global program to make liberals die.
Oh, boss.
You've given us a really intense and really interesting talk, and I'm dying to know if there's some way we can access this. Did you ever put this on the web or someplace where we can get, because I couldn't pick it up nearly as fast as you put it out.
I can email it to you. It's only about 10 megabytes. So
Thank you.
You can email it.
Does anybody else want that?
Yeah.
I'll actually get it for my son. Just email it to me,
Okay.
and I'll get you my, well, you have my email address, but I'll get you.
Yes. Okay, I'll send it to Carol. You can
I'll
put a
attach
link or
it.
something on it. One
Yeah,
more, Carol?
exactly.
I've read that sunspots affect climate more than anything we have done, any industrial thing.
Yep.
Well, the sun is the driver. It really is absolutely the driver. There's only two ways for the Earth to get warm. One is from internal radioactive decay and the release of heat from the molten metal on the inside, okay? So there's heat coming out of the crust, but there's a lot of heat coming in from the sun. And the balance between those two and the clouds and their effect and the oceans and their effect are what really controls it. And as I said, somebody mentioned the Milankovitch cycles every 100,000 years. That's caused by the orbit of the sun and the position of the Earth around the sun. So sunspots are just a manifestation of the activity of the sun. And they go through an 11-year cycle. So right now we're in the bottom of the cycle, and the sun is absolutely clear. There are no sunspots. And in fact, over the last cycle, which lasts 11 years, it was the second weakest cycle since they started counting. And those cycles go down, that means the sun is becoming less and less active. There's also a 150-year cycle. And we've been in what's called a solar max for the last 150 years or thereabouts. So you got this big cycle, we've got these little peaks going up and down, and then it's going to come down. So probably in 20 years, the solar influence will be very much less than it is now. so it will cool off.
Well, that's after the 12 years we're not supposed to be around anymore.
That's right.
Yeah. All right, so I feel like I was dismissed my question about chemtrails, because when you say that man is not causing, I get this talk about carbon, but when you were talking about the sun's effect, and we see them spraying us on a regular basis, which spreads particularly across sun areas, that this is having some kind of an effect on us and our health right now, human beings' health. And they can attribute it, that's what my alarm is. We are educated, we're on your side, we get it that we're not causing global warming. But this chemtrail stuff and geoengineering is a deliberate attempt to affect humans' health, and also get people in general to think that, oh yeah, this is not caused by that. Nobody looks up there hardly. They're just saying, we as human beings, by what we're driving and what we're doing, we are creating this for ourselves. So what I'm saying is our ignorance of 99% of the population that doesn't get it, they are buying into that we are at cause ourselves, instead of that maybe some of these health effects and things we're having is created by geoengineering. I mean, do you know anything about that? Do you go into that direction at all? No? Okay.
One trick pony.
Well,
All right. Thanks, Arvid. Probably kept you long enough. Okay.